Hey everyone, Jonathan here from The Land Method, and welcome to this week's episode of Crushing Land. And what we're going to be talking about this week is using different funding techniques on your property. So in the past, we've done a video about joint ventures and how to set them up. So you can reference that. We'll actually put the link to that video in the comments, just so that, or in the description here, so that you can go back and watch that. But what we're going to do today is we're actually going to do a little bit of a comparison between different types of funding. One of the things that's true in this business and any real estate business, investing business in general, is that you do not want to rely on just a single technique. You have to go with what makes sense. And there's certain aspects and certain avenues that make sense in different things. And so what we're going to talk about today is actually taking out a hard money loan on a property and comparing that to a joint venture and which one you should be doing. And the bottom line is that when it comes to this, a few different things come into play. First, if you're going to go down this path of any sort of loan, JV, hard money, whatever, it has to be a situation where it just makes sense to do it. There's a time constraint. It's a deal that you just want to lock up because it makes money. It makes a substantial amount of money. A lot of different things where that is the standard, and that's where that makes sense. Our standard way of doing things, if it's not the case, is to double close the property and use transactional funding, right? So transactional funding is going to be your cheapest option if you don't have the money to bring to closing. So use transactional funding where appropriate. We've done a full Crushing Land on that before, where we interviewed Dave. He was on here for an hour with us and going over all that. If you want to watch that and hear about transactional funding and where it comes into play and all of that, you can watch that video as well. We'll put that in the description as well for you. But in the situations where transactional funding just doesn't work, you're not going to do an A to B, B to C transaction at the exact same time, double closing, where you're actually going to take title of the property. There's a couple different ways to do that. Again, joint venture, hard money loans. We've talked about joint ventures before. We'll talk about them a little bit more today. But what we're going to do is we're going to break down the difference. And the bottom line is, when you break this down and when you're looking at it, you need to know your numbers. That's all it comes down to. You need to know your numbers to decide which way you want to go. So for example, we're going to use simple numbers just to help you guys here to see the difference. Let's say that you have a $20,000 purchase price on a piece of property. You're buying a piece of property for $20,000 and you get into a JV. So you get into a joint venture and you work with somebody, and it's their first time, so they're a little bit more aggressive. So they want to do a 70-30 split. You get 70% of profits, they get 30%. Okay. Say you sell the property for $40,000. How much does the partner get? Well, that's easy, right? $20,000 in profit, 30%, $6,000. So they're getting $6,000 on that JV. And the thing with that is it's regardless of time. So if you sell that property 2 weeks later, they're getting $6,000. If you sell it 6 months later, they're getting $6,000. The timing doesn't matter. What about a hard money loan on that property? Well, again, $20,000. The interest on those is basically designed where it goes up every single month. So if you had it for 6 months, based on who we would recommend working with, you'd be looking at about a 35% interest rate after 6 months. Now, the 35% is on the $20,000, not on the profits in this case. It's on the amount borrowed. So 35% is $7,000. So after 6 months, you sell it again, you sell it for $40,000. Where are you at? Well, you're basically off. You have to pay $7,000 now to that partner. So it's a little bit less of a deal for you than the joint venture at 6 months. But again, this is where I said you have to know your numbers. What happens if you sold it after only 90 days? You have a 90-day deal here that you do with a joint venture agreement. You have $20,000, but the interest now is only 20% because it's only 90 days. So you're paying 20% on the $20,000, which is $4,000. So now that lender's only getting $4,000 back. So you're actually in a better situation than the joint venture. So it's knowing your numbers, knowing your time frames. And again, there's nothing is written in stone and you just know this for certain, but it's knowing which one seems to make the most sense in those type of situations. Part of it too is obviously how long you think it's going to sell, knowing your numbers, where it's going to go, all of that. The other thing is, obviously, we use 20 to 40, but what happens if we went from $20,000 to $60,000? Well, the joint venture changes in that case, right? You buy it for 20, you sell it for 60. The joint venture, they're still getting 30%. So now it's 30% on $40,000 instead of $20,000. So instead of $6,000, they're making $12,000. And again, that's if you sell it a day later or if you sell it 6 months later. But the hard money lending, that doesn't change. So those numbers are still the same because it's based on the purchase price, not the sale price. So in that case, now you've got a bigger spread. Guess what? You gave away a lot more of the deal in the joint venture, $12,000, where it would take a long time to get to $12,000 with the hard money person. Remember, after 6 months with them, it was only $7,000. So even if you were selling it for 60, you'd still only owe them their money plus the $7,000, so $27,000 as opposed to 32 to the joint venture person because it's based on profit sharing. So it really comes down to knowing your numbers, knowing your risk, knowing which way you should go, things like that. We've used both. There's nothing wrong with either format, but it's really calculating out your numbers to figure out which one makes the most sense. Now, we were just talking to a student the other day that was using very similar numbers to these, and it made more sense to go with the hard money situation than it did to go with the joint venture. We worked with another student that I was talking to just yesterday, and what she was looking at, and we said, no, because of where you're at, and it was a much bigger, we're up over 6 figures now on what the loan would be. Their situation, it made more sense to go with the joint venture. Even if they had to give away half the deal, it still made more sense because of what their numbers were. It wasn't a huge money-making deal as far as any ratio. It was going to be on the spread if they did a deal. So in that case, the joint venture agreement made more sense. And that's where we come into play. Obviously, we're working with our students and we're directing them the right way, looking at these numbers and trying to help them with that. The other thing, obviously, that you can do is if you're getting a deal under contract and you're doing a time-sensitive thing because of hard money, well, the obvious thing is you obviously have room to play on the back end with your buyer, right? You do not need to sell it for what we just talked about, right? We just said, okay, you're buying it for $20,000, you're selling it for $60,000. Well, maybe you don't want to wait 6 months and owe $7,000, right? Maybe you don't want to take any risk. You don't want to do anything. So maybe you get rid of that property very quickly. It's worth 60. I can sell it for 45 tomorrow, right? Very quickly. So you've got it under contract for 20. You sell within a month. Guess what? You only owe $2,000 in interest. So now you're 22 into the property, you sell it for 45 and you made over $20,000 on that deal. So there's a lot of different ways that you can strategize this out. And again, it comes down to knowing your numbers and figuring out the best way to move forward with it. And again, that's where we come in. We're not doing the loans, but we have people that we recommend for transactional funding and for joint venturing and for doing actually hard money loans and things like that. We have different ones that we recommend that can help you with that and to be able to actually have the deal go through and fund it. But when it comes down to helping you pick out the best strategy to not leave money on the table, to get the deal done, to all that, so whether or not I should use transactional funding and only consider that A to B, B to C, same day, double close, no risk beyond that. Obviously, that's your best risk mitigation doing that for money, but it may not make sense in certain cases because of like really good deals or timeframes or whatever it may be. So from there, that's where we help you and say, okay, this is where you should be looking at a JV, or you should be looking at hard money, and this is the way to calculate this out and figure out what's best for your deal. So if you want more help with that, if you want to discuss this, if you want to look at anything that we have to offer you, please feel free to reach out to us. The information is down below. You can schedule a free 15-minute business consult with us where we go over everything and show you kind of what you need to do to get into this business and see where you're at to help you to be successful. All you have to do is call the number below or use the calendar link down below to schedule that. So again, everybody, thanks for joining us this week on Crushing Land. We look forward to seeing you much more. And again, remember, in just a couple of weeks, we just started talking about this. We have our free 5-day workshop that we're going to be going over a whole bunch of information like this to really help you to be successful in your land investing business right now using today's proven techniques, not old information, not just the same stuff that's been kind of recycled and circulated around 10 different ways, for the last 10, 20 years. No, this is fresh information that's working right now. So again, make sure you come to that. It's live in our Facebook group. If you didn't register yet, you want to register at flipmylandclass.com. That link will be down below as well. So again, everybody, thanks for joining us this week on Crushing Land, and we'll catch you next time.